We're going to go ahead and get started, folks. Thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. I'm James Farmer, member here at the Ostrom Workshop, and please have Ryan Patrick Kelly visit us from the northern driftless region of far west western Wisconsin. But before we get into that, I appreciate. I just want to say thank you to those people that don't work on campus that I don't know, found a parking spot somewhere and you made your way to campus. So thank you very much. I know that's not an easy endeavor. Um, it was back in the fall. I think I was doom scrolling on Facebook and I saw this guy, heard this guy talking and he was talking about the last dairy closing on your road. And that was the first episode I watched, which those of you that know me well would realize that resonated with me, for what I do now and where I grew up. And so then I kept watching more videos and more videos, and your conversation about the rural areas was just like, oh, I think he's talking about Indiana. And then your accent, I knew you weren't from Indiana, but and I'm like, so finally I was like, I got to get this guy to campus because it's basically discussing what we do in my food systems and community resilience class. You're talking about it, but you have 78,000 people following you online instead of the 30 that I have that are subjected to my class. So I thought it would benefit, the community to get you down here. So I thank you very much for taking time. I know you're a farmer, you got a family, and appreciate you coming down here to visit with us. And I'm going to turn it over to you. And thank you all very much for being here today.
So thank you. Ryan Kelly is my name. I'm a small farmer and a traditional farmer. I guess years ago you didn't consider what was a traditional farm, what wasn't. But the one thing that we've seen in our country is a rise in farm to table and niche sort of direct to consumer products, which is really cool. But I'm one of those guys that, you got the really, really small people making soaps and selling, goat cheese or whatever. And then you got mega CAFOs and large grain operations. And I'm one of those guys in the middle that, and if I had a time machine, I'd be a big farmer, but I don't. So I'm in this weird spot. So everybody loves to be in the middle. I'm the fifth generation of my family to farm in the US. That I don't know what they did in Ireland. My grandpa claims they farmed. I don't know. But I'm a first gen farmer though. Because we're Irish, we don't all get along. So I can do it better on my own. I'm going on my own. And I took a lot of pride in that. I think my dad did the same thing. Him and my grandpa had butt heads. He bought his own farm. And there was a certain amount of pride in that. Like, I'm not the biggest farmer, but I did this. So there's a lot of pride in there. And I'm a nerd about all things farming. Like I can bore you with tractor, specs and parts and numbers. You'd fall asleep. That's how I met my wife. I just bored her to death talking about John Deere International Harvester. But that kind of took off online. People like talking about tractors. They like arguing about tractors, especially guys with Al Chalmers hats. Love to argue about tractors. Yeah. So, and the arguments are entertaining and people enjoy that. But as I've gotten older, so I'm in my late 40s now. I was born in 78. I started to kind of look around and go, now, wait a minute. It's like we've been getting less and less farmers. I mean, for at this point, thousands of years, right? We were an agrarian society. And then along the way, we've gotten less and less and became more urbanized, and it really accelerated under, basically the Industrial Revolution and then a couple of world wars thrown in there. And there's been less and less farmers. Nothing new, but, we're this whole flock of chickens doing our thing. And then one day you look around and you're like, where's all the chickens, And so you can either learn to be the fastest chicken or eventually, it doesn't matter. The fox is going to get you. So how about we go take care of the fox is what I started to think. And I've shifted a lot of my stuff to that. And that creates a lot of friction among people, which is really frustrating. That there's a lot of ego that comes along in, agriculture. You have people that are sitting on tons of assets, often passed down through generations. And the thought of changing any of that stuff really is abrasive to some people. But I like to say that I'm not anti big farm, but I'm very pro small farm. Doesn't seem to be enough support there. So just to give a little overview of what's been going on in agriculture. So the National Agricultural Statistics Service, does a census of agriculture every so many, I think it's every 5 years. So in 1992 and 2022 would be the comparison here. So a 30-year period. The definition of a farm, according to the USDA, at one point, I think it's still there. It's if you sell over $1,000 worth of stuff. $1,000 of gross income on your farm is not a sustainable. You're not buying anything with that, right? But if you look back, sales over $500,000, 1992, there were only about 47,000 operations in the US that did that. So what you've got is we've got this small percentage of the population in the US that farms, but of that, the vast majority of that production is done by that much of it, So in 2022, though, that number had jumped up to 173,000. So at first glance, you're like, well, that's good. We're gaining farms. But we're not really gaining farms. Now, on the other end, I went with less than $2,500 worth of sales a year. That was their lowest breakdown. We actually increased. And that's your direct to market, your farm to food table, whatever you want to say. We gained actually a lot. Over 250,000 of these really small farms, which is a good thing. There's nothing wrong with that. But once again, sales under $2,500, what's the economic activity of that to a rural community? It's somewhat minimal. So everything in the middle, though. So 50 to 100,000. In 1992, there were 187,760 operations that were like that. 2022, we were down to 116,220. And then, 2,500 to 5,000. So that's still pretty small, but not micro the way the other stuff is. And we lost about 70,000 of those size farms too. So everything in the middle just keeps getting smaller and smaller. And in the middle is what supported rural America. So you have the small town, the implement dealer in town, hardware store, the feed mill or whatever. He was making his living on everybody in the middle, right? The real small person, they might buy their stuff at Amazon or online. The ones in the middle can't get a UPS order to bring the feed for their animals or whatever it is. So these were the guys that supported rural America. And that implement dealer, he did business with the car dealer and everybody went to the grocery store and everything. And as you have lost all those farms in the middle, you've lost the brownie business that supported them and the employees. And before you know it, small towns start to just dry up. And that's a real problem. And that scares me. I'm from a place far western Wisconsin, where Minneapolis, St. Paul is. Just southeast of there, about 45 minutes. We're close to the Mississippi River. Our area has been growing. And at first look, you go, oh, the farmers look like they're doing well, nice farmsteads. The schools are good in our area, but it has nothing to do with agriculture. It's everything to do with the economy of the Twin Cities. It becomes a bedroom community. So growing up, our county had I forget how many feed mills there were. Some of these towns had 2 feed mills. Our town had 2 feed mills in it. We have 1 feed mill left in an entire county. Growing up, there were 2 implement dealers in our town. There were 3 hardware stores. We have no implement dealers and 1 hardware store. There isn't a single implement dealer in our county. So what does that matter? It's like, well, that is small business. Small business is the middle class, right? Like in some cases, that was the upper middle class. You owned a, Ford dealership or something. You were upper middle class, right? But they employed people and everything else. Now everyone goes to work up in a large metropolitan area. That isn't the same. Then you're supporting the big grocery stores on your way home. You're doing all your business up there. That's not healthy. And like I said, our schools are fine, property taxes are fine because we have a big tax base. People are still living here. But then you get into central Wisconsin or you get to central Illinois where there's just not as many people. Well, then what? What happens when you lose all this infrastructure? Then the towns die. So that really started to hit me. And I went, I farming's never going to be easy. It wasn't easy for me to start either, but I still want somebody like a younger me to at least get that opportunity to scratch and claw and do it. There is no winner. Like we're becoming, I don't know if you guys are familiar with how Europe was when most of our ancestors left. It was feudal. You had a noble class and you had serfs. The wealth was up here. They left to come here for opportunity. And it's vastly becoming that. You got these large operations, the financial incentives they have and ability pushes out smaller and smaller operations. They're not going to mess with your 2-acre plot that the under 2,500 cow guy or $2,500 guy has. So that's why that's growing. But everybody in the middle, is going away. So you got a guy that's grossing $250,000 of farm sales on millions of dollars worth of assets. The only reason it works is because they've been doing it or the family has been doing it. So once that's gone, no young person replaces them. It gets absorbed by a bigger operation. So that really started to hit home. And as somebody that went on their own, when I was a little bit younger, I was like, well, just work hard. Just work hard. Anybody that was younger. And it's like, well, I mean, at some point, these assets have inflated so fast that there's no catching it. That was like old farmers saying to me, somebody that inherited their farm from their dad going, well, I don't know, I haven't paid cash for everything my whole life. And I used to laugh and say, well, you couldn't have saved enough money in my lifetime to ever keep up with the inflation. So I went, something's kind of wrong here. Let's look at this. So there's a lot of catchphrases in farming. One of those things is the cheap food policy. We've all, if you've been involved in farming, you've heard about the cheap food policy, right? That's a justification for everything. It's the justification for low prices and high subsidies and everything. It's the American people pay the, lowest per capita, food cost of anybody in the world. It's the cheapest food source per capita. Gosh, that's a good thing, right? But when you start thinking about it, you've eroded this middle class in the middle farmers, right? They're disappearing. Well, don't you think that the income levels in those rural areas are also dropping down? So now if you're, economically struggling in your area, are you going to go to a Whole Foods or a grocery co-op with locally sourced, higher expensive, products? Probably not. You're going to go to Walmart. So yeah, so it's cheaper, but you don't have as much money. Wouldn't you rather, keep that? If that money stayed in the community, it would support the local grocery store and everything else. And that's where I think the cheap food policy is a lie. And it's a good way for people to justify their actions. Well, we're feeding the world, so it's a noble cause. And I always say to that, which growing up, there's nothing wrong with taking pride in being a farmer. It's a noble thing at its core, right? You're growing food, clothing, and shelter for the population. That's a noble cause. But somewhere along the line, it shifted and it became big business. And if it was, truly, you're a burden in life or say like a military or a first responder sort of career, nobody backstabs anybody to get into the military. But there are horror stories in farm country about people trying to rent land out from under people or buy land out, estates getting just, the greed gets involved. It's become big business. And there's nothing wrong with farm assets having value and for people to have, a retirement from their farm. But I mean, this is getting way too big, and it's outpacing the ability for farmers to farm. And that's what worries me a lot. And I feel like somehow farmland has become similar to gold from the standpoint gold is a store of wealth. Like gold has industrial uses, right? It's a conductor. It can get used for a lot of things, and it can be used for jewelry, etc. But the number one use of gold is it stores wealth. We trade gold because gold has always been worth money. And I think that's what happened with farmland is it's become gold, and then it's disconnected from, its actual value as far as production. Land rents have gone up considerably since I've been a kid, but it's minimal compared to the percentage that the value of that farmland has gone up. That has far exceeded that. So that tells me that it's diverging from its actual value. So, and once it becomes an asset class like that, an investment asset class, then you're attracting the billionaires and everything else. We all know Bill Gates is one of the largest landowners in the country. Why is he investing in farmland? Because Bill wants to farm really bad? I don't think so. So that worries me. And part of that happened from the structure of agriculture. We have taken a lot of the risk out of farming from the standpoint of a lot of the programs. These farm programs, there's some repercussions from that because once we offer crop insurance and can guarantee returns and everything else, what happens when you take the risk out of something? The return is minimal. So it's good if you own a bunch of farmland because your land cost is going to be, that's where you're getting your revenue is from the land value versus what you're actually producing. And to me, I think getting the investor class, you can't ban people from owning farmland, right? We should ban foreign countries probably from owning our farmland. Why that has been allowed is beyond me. That only makes sense. Some states like Iowa do have laws against that already, but you can't force somebody to just say you can't own this, but you can take away the incentives, and like the crop insurance thing is a blessing and a curse. As a young farmer, you can't afford to lose a crop, right? You need that. But on the other hand, nobody farms 10,000 acres without insurance to guarantee a return on that because no one can sustain losing, 10,000 acres at $1,000 an acre. You're talking about $1 million operating loss, right? So, or it'd be more than that. But so we need to kind of overhaul some of these government policies, and I think the investment class on land a lot has to do with tax laws. We have 1031 land exchanges. You have people, a 1031 land exchange is a wonderful thing if you're that guy on the outskirts of town and you just want to farm your farm and town is swallowing you up. You should be able to sell your farm and move further out to continue to farm. If you own an apartment or a series of apartment complexes all around campus here and decide to cash them in, you shouldn't be able to tax-free go buy farmland because it's another investment. That drives up land values because once again, it'd be like selling your apartment buildings and buying gold back. And then you can incrementally get your money back out of the gold. They're not going to allow that, but it's a gray area. It's an investment class. So this car dealership that I own, well, the value of the car dealership is in the real estate. So that's why it's my investment property. I'm going to buy this farm as my investment property. That's an abuse to me. So there's some major things that happened along the way in my lifetime that changed farming from where it became a big business. I look back, farming was just it was a way of life more than it was a big business at one point. It was always about a business. It should never have been looked at not as a business, but it became big business. And a few things happened in there. NAFTA was a big one. GMO technology was another one, which the accelerated pace of technology is making farming more efficient and less profitable. And then one of the biggest things was the RFS. So the RFS raised corn prices, and you think, well, that's good. We should, and domestic demand, and you know what the RFS is? It's the renewable fuel standard, and it's when we started to require ethanol to be put into gas. Good from the standpoint of you're putting this money back into rural America. They're making ethanol out in farm country, jobs created by that. Overall, it's a great thing, right? The problem is some of the unintended consequences. If the RFS was the answer and the solution to low corn prices in the early 2000s, why are we having more disaster payments again? The gross on corn is considerably higher than it was before the RFS, but yet we're in terrible profit levels. So till we fundamentally fix the underlying issues, if we go to E15, if we go to E20, if we make a new trade deal with India, it doesn't matter. In a few more years, we absolutely produce to that level, right back to where we started. So I look at in 1992, there were 69,339,869 acres of corn planted in 1992. 2002, I forget what year the RFS got signed into. It was right around there. It might have been 04, maybe. We were at 68 million and change in 2002. 2007, by that point, the RFS had fully kicked in. Now we're up to 86 million and change. That's significant. Like that added. So what did that do? The money's in corn. It fed on itself. North Dakota was not. Earl Butz, famous Purdue alum, was known for saying a lot of fun sayings. One of those got him fired, but Earl once said that the Corn Belt never went north of I-90. And I-90 runs across Minnesota, South Dakota, Wisconsin. He said it doesn't go above that. And if you look at corn production in the country today, I mean, that significant amounts of corn are grown north of I-90. So we shifted the Corn Belt because, hey, the money's in corn. I always say if the RFS, if they would have said cottonseed, as it turns out, yields the most ethanol than corn does, they would have developed cotton varieties to grow here. They would have had it in Illinois, you name it, right? It goes where the money is. So what we started to do is give up on other crops that typically were grown in our area. I look back in our county data. In our county, we were primarily dairy. We're close to the Mississippi, so there was always some cash cropping. There was a lot of hogs. We'll get to hogs. And if I get too long and you just want to go to questions, you can cut me off at any time.
No, we'll go for a while longer.
Okay, because I'll ramble. All right. Okay. All right. So we started to give up on all these other crops. Our county, corn acres have stayed the same for as far back as I can see. We stayed relatively level on our corn acres because corn was a feedstuff. It's continued to be a feedstuff all these years. But what happened was our oats acres went away. Wheat acres went away. Hay for forage went away. The corn acres shifted from corn for silage to corn for grain. That number, the total number of acres planted stayed the same, but the uses of that corn changed. And that had everything to do with us. And then once you started to interject, you had a perfect storm. So we get the RFS. You've got more technology in the seed, more technology in the equipment, making farming easier and larger scale. At the same time, it becomes more profitable. And that starts to push out small livestock. And small livestock isn't competing when you're doing all this. So what happens in livestock? Well, we better consolidate in livestock. And the best way to keep farmers on farms, like as a small young farmer, you want to get started as a traditional farmer. It takes livestock because the gross dollars off of your acres is going to be considerably better, and the net will be better off of those acres, of a smaller number of acres, than you will of just raising a cash crop commodity. You just simply, you get more return feeding it through livestock. But now you've taken the ability for these smaller, younger farmers out by raising grain prices to incentivize the crop farmers. You've been giving them, more subsidies, more crop insurance for this, and then allowing large CAFOs, which that's a whole problem in itself, the large CAFO. There's a lot of things that happened, and yeah. And with all this technology and this profitability that got put into corn production after that and crop production, because of course soybeans then had to compete to keep up for the corn acres. Soybean prices rose, so it led to farmers being older. Farmers have been old for a long time. It's scary to me that at 48 years old, I'm a young farmer. That's scary. But in 1992, the average age of a farmer was 53 years. By 2022, it had already raised to 58. And what do you think it's done since then? It's gone up even more. So we're, another 10% on that. But that's allowing opportunity, isn't it? That's a scary, scary thing. So how are we gonna? Well, let's talk about the livestock thing, because this is a real, real sticky thing. Because you've got, are you guys familiar with the hog production in our country? So hogs were traditionally farrow to finish. Farrow is a sow gives birth to piglets, and then you raise those pigs up to slaughter, where they go in, and there's where your bacon and your ham and your pork chops come from. That model changed in the 90s. We saw a massive depression in hog prices in 95 and again in 98. And that chased out independent hog producers all over. And we started integration, where we have a sow unit that farrows all these pigs, and then they send the pigs out to satellite farms where they're raised on contract. And farmers were very, not only willing, they were readily accepting this, because they went from depression to having this consistent model that brought them revenue and a safe return. And at first it was really good, because building costs were here. They were paying for pig space was here. It was like, wow, that's a good model. Over time, as you get more of these facilities in there, building construction started to creep up, and this really wasn't keeping up, because they have new facilities and everything else. So then pretty soon the profitability on that kind of goes away. And in the meantime, we lose independent hog production. So 92, I think, percent of the hogs in this country are growing under contract of some sort. What I've found. So do you think those other 8% can control the market? No. So I worry as we go forward with all this continued consolidation that's going to spread to the grain production. There was a time chickens and turkeys were very independent. Eggs were very independent in our country. The old farm wife, that was egg money. If you've ever heard egg money, that's where their revenue came from, was sales of eggs. Well, that's all kind of consolidated. There isn't a lot of independent chickens other than the backyard flocks and stuff like that. So we got that. And then in dairy, was what our area was known for. Um, so dairy became trying to compete with all this stuff. When I sold my dairy cows, it was an easy transition. Crop prices were good. We had the RFS. It's like, you know what? Why am I beating my head against the wall? So I'll just switch to crop farming. And dairy exploded. And part of that is our immigration policy, because labor was a major component of dairy. That's why dairy and farrow to finish hogs were profitable, because it was work, right? The more work there is, the more value there is in your labor. With the open border policies and stuff, that led these large dairies to expand and get their labor supply. Because this small farm was doing it with himself, with his own labor and family labor. So the dollars, you ever hear asset or cash poor, asset rich? That's what a farmer was. He had all these assets, but that was his pay. He was working towards building something, right? Now you've got somebody over here that builds this big facility. Now they can get that labor. And whether or not going forward, a lot of that labor too is going to get replaced by technology. It's a matter of time. Whether or not we can put the genie back in the bottle, I don't know at this point. But either way, it happened. Here we are. Now you have, rural communities that needed all these little dairy farms, and now we're building mega dairies out in the western states. We have, high plains, or in Oklahoma, they're building these massive tens of thousands of cow dairies. That's taking away from these traditional areas, and there's still in our area, there were small farms that kept on, but the problem is there's less and less of them. Eventually your market's going to go away, because the processors with all these small farms aren't going to be able to compete where you've got vertical integration. When you're getting tens of thousands of cows in one spot, it's just a matter of time before they get their production facilities right there, or their processing. And how do you compete with that? Um, the quick answer is, okay, niche markets, let's do organics, let's direct to consumer, etc. That's fine, but that isn't enough yet. So it'd be really easy to overrun that space too. We aren't going to fix anything. And then, like the organic thing, when that started, originally cows, there were standards, cattle had to have access to green pastures, et cetera, and everything else. Well, now if you look, they don't all say that anymore. So they're going to do that same thing with the large CAFOs. And to the small communities, you've got massive truck traffic and disturbances from having these large CAFOs, where you spread the manure load out, and the feed production was all spread out on these little farms. These township roads weren't meant for, I've seen 10 loaded semis sitting on the shoulder of the road in the spring waiting to unload manure into a drag line. Or if a guy decides he wants to build, small engines in his garage, nobody in the neighborhood's going to have a problem with that. But if Polaris builds a giant new manufacturing plant there, they're going to make some changes in the roads. They're going to have, a lot of things are going to have to be done different, and that's going to create revenue, where some of these CAFOs are somewhat protected under, the rules that we have to protect agriculture. And the fallout from that is real, because where we're at, close to the Twin Cities, there's a lot of townships that are trying to pass ordinances of all kinds. And the guys in the middle are the collateral damage. No one had a problem with them, but now there's this giant CAFO, and they're going to pass laws against him that are going to affect the ones in the middle. And that's a little bit scary. So dairy is a really scary thing to me from that standpoint going forward. But I've got some ideas on how we can help some of this. Yeah. The 1031 stuff, like we don't even need new laws. We just need to close the loopholes. So when you're trading your car dealership for this farm over there, that's not right. If you want to buy another car dealership, do it tax free. I don't think anybody'd have a problem with that. You get mad at GM, go ahead and buy a Chrysler dealership. I don't care. But to do that with a farm, no. We can fix that. Um, and that should be not only just like kind, but it should be somewhat acre to acre. So if you're selling for a housing or Amazon's going to build a warehouse on your farm and they want 80 acres. Well, you shouldn't be able to sell 80 acres on a square foot percentage basis and then turn around and buy 3,000 acres, driving up the land prices for everybody in that community where you move to. Um, the other thing is we can start a lot with the tax code to incentivize passing farms down to a younger generation, like cap gains, etc. Let's move this to a young beginning. We already have qualifications for young and beginning farmers to get loans, so we can follow these qualifications and go. If you sell to this farmer, this young and beginning farmer, we'll let you skip the cap gains on it, but you got to take 80% of that off your purchase price. So, to incentivize that, the direct payments and the subsidies and the RFS and everything else, instead of pushing for even more ethanol production and everything else, let's start putting some of that money back into programs to help young and beginning farmers and for development of other markets. So the fallout of, going to corn and soybeans as our primary crops is we don't have markets in a lot of areas. So that guy in North Dakota that's been growing corn and you say, quit growing corn in North Dakota, he goes, I can't, because what else am I going to sell here now? Because so we're going to need some redevelopment here. And let's build markets. I shake my head all the time that we used to grow a ton of oats when I was a kid. That was a thing. Everybody had their oats. We import 90 some percent. It's, I think, 90 or 92% of our oats from Canada now. So this spring, when we're having our trade spat with Canada, it's like, so we got a trade spat with Canada, and that's where we're getting this stuff from. And then we're trying to sell this stuff to China, and we're having a trade spat with them. What if we didn't ship this stuff to China and we just grew the stuff that Canada is threatening us with ourselves? You know, um, trying to just process for an export market is a scary thing going forward because we're going to have a hard time competing against, South America is going to continue to expand their production. China is aggressively investing in Africa, from what I've heard. Um, and I don't know that their human rights policies are the same as us trying to establish production in, say, Africa will. So maybe they can tame that. They do. There goes that customer. So if we're going to count on these export markets, it's a waste of time. The only reason I think China is buying from us is they want us to buy their junk back, which it's like, let's build our junk here and you guys do your thing, we'll do our thing, is kind of my thinking on that, but we'll see. The absentee land ownership. So you're Bill Gates owning this farmland. Let's treat it like an investment. Their property taxes, et cetera, should be cap gains, you name it, should all be taxed at a higher rate than anybody that's farming it. If you're not an owner, operator, farmer, you shouldn't be getting these tax breaks. So the old farmer that lived here, his kids moved off the farm long ago. They're in their 50s or 60s. Their kids are taking an interest in the money now. They didn't grow up on that farm. They don't have a lot of ties to it. The old man dies and leaves it to his kids and the grandkids. They want the money. So they sell it. They didn't care about the old neighbor down the road that always helped them. Him and his son would always come over and help. They don't care about that. They don't have that relationship. So they want the money. That's where the 1031 buyer or the investor, et cetera, gets that farm, right? So now that investor It's an investment. He wants the most return he can get out of that, right? So he's not going to rent it to the farmer that didn't get the chance to buy it at an affordable price. He's sure not going to rent it to him for an affordable price. He's going to find the large CAFO, the large operator, whoever's willing to pay the most amount of money. And that guy might come in from a long ways away. So now we're this old farmer, his money was here, it stayed in the community and he did all this. Well, now the land rent leaves there and goes to wherever the investor is from. So that revenue's gone. And the crop is now being harvested and taken out of the area to wherever that big farmer's from. And he's doing the inputs and everything in his area and bringing them in. So you've just completely left this area. There's no more economic activity for them on that farm. That's not right. So that should be aggressively taxed, very different than an owner operator farmer. The farm program should be only for owner operator farmers. I have a friend that says cash rent should be disallowed on farm programs. Because the whole point of the farm programs, if you look back, the idea of the farm programs were to keep people in rural America. I mean, if you go back to the New Deal, it was to keep farmers on the land and keep people in rural America. And a lot of these programs are hurting it. So let's get rid of that. So if they are not encouraging people to stay there on the farm locally and help that community, no, it shouldn't be. So I don't know that the quick growing crops for export markets, like I said, that's kind of, I think let's take care of our domestic needs. I don't see where there's anything that say Mexico could grow that we can't grow in the South. There's nothing that Canada can grow that we can't grow here. And if we put the development into new varieties and crops, just like they did with corn, there's no reason that we can't make that happen here. And not that we can't trade with other people, but why don't we take care of our own needs first? And then we'll worry about the rest of that if we need to. The CAFOs, like I said, that's not necessarily a farm anymore. So it should be treated accordingly. It should not be getting any loopholes from that. And we need more livestock. I shake my head. This latest disaster payment, the payment rates are generally for the typical crops, although oats did get a pretty good payment, which is odd to me. But we're currently, beef prices are record high. We don't have enough beef in this country, right? So you'd think, well, obviously then pasture and hay production or something is going to get a big payment in this. No, there was no payment on that. So let's incentivize more of that livestock stuff. And we have to do this all really soon because there's a few things that are going to happen really fast here. Is number one, we're losing generations to grow up on the farm already. We've lost a lot of small farms in that 30-year period, right? It's going to accelerate because as you roll the snowball, it grows. So the next 30 years, it's going to be way worse. And that's all the more young people that aren't going to grow up on a farm that aren't going to have that farm experience. So who are you going to get to do some of this work? The other thing is the baby boomers hold the largest share of land in the country. As they age out, that land is going to be coming to market. Is it going to go to that small beginning farmer? Probably not. It's going to end up going to the investor, et cetera, or green energy. The green energy programs are kind of a problem too, as far as you got farmers that are selling their solar rights on their land for big money and they're driving up land just like a 1031 land exchange. So there's a lot of fallout to that we, which to me, I got approached about wind energy on my land. And I was like, I didn't take an interest. And one of the reasons is we don't know in our political climate what the next administration is going to feel about this. So you think, well, I'm going to sign this solar lease for 30 years. 2 years later, the funding gets pulled out from under it. The company that you got to fund the solar lease through has a bond to protect some of that to a certain extent, but then you're stuck and hung with it. In the long run, are those acres coming out of production good for prices in agriculture? Sure. But once again, you're taking opportunity away from people. So what if we split up the the livestock, let's get that spread out more. We know protein is good for people. We finally figured out that butter was better for us than, plastic on your toast. So let's have some more of that. Let's healthier food. We don't need all this technology in our beef from GMOs or, you know, and I'm not demonizing GMOs for saying they're unhealthy or if you eat GMO or that's going to hurt you or GMO soybeans, any of that stuff. I look at purely from economics. We went from at the introduction, but prior to the introduction of GMOs, there were hundreds of seed companies. Indiana had tons. I mean, the Funk family alone had like 4 brands under them. And then we introduced GMOs and new companies basically controlled the entire market. We lost all that independent production. So I look at it as we drove our seed costs up and our prices paid down from our production producing. So to me, some of this technology we don't need. Our BST in cattle is another thing. Really not milking cows. And I remember and a lot of this, the farm media doesn't help farmers. They're trying to sell products, right? So the message they put out is, I remember being told we need to stand up for BST. And I'm like, wait a minute, we're overproducing milk. What do we need to synthetically increase our milk production? So a lot of this technology we don't need. And if the prices come down, things will adjust. But there's going to be a hard transition as you start to change this thing. And it'll take time to do this. But I think in the long run, the way we're at isn't sustainable. It's just not. If with the pace at which we're losing these farmers, it is only accelerating more. At some point, you're going to run out, and the technology's coming. They're working on driverless tractors, or they have them basically now. That technology is going to get even better. The robots and dairy, all the technology and any livestock production is going to get easier and easier. So if we don't start to fix it now, there'll be more and more pain as this goes on. So I don't know. To me, it's a little bit more personal. When I was a single dairy farmer, I was thinking, I did this on my own. I don't owe this to anybody. What do I need to? I don't owe anybody anything. This is me. And then I get older and I go, but at least I had opportunity. I owe that to somebody to give that opportunity. And every time I hear, that's one of my biggest pet peeves. I'll end with that. One of my biggest pet peeves is people say, there ain't any young people that want to do that. Young guys don't want to do that. They don't want to milk cows. They don't want to raise pigs. They're lazy. They're no good generation. There's a ton. I get emails and messages all the time. I've shot a lot of videos with them. They want to do it. They want that lifestyle. So when people say that, that's an excuse to cash in a generational opportunity. So even though somebody didn't give me the farm, if I say, well, you know what? This is just how it is. I'm not going to argue about the way things are. And I cash in when I get older. Well, then I'm cashing in the opportunity that I had. And to me, that's wrong. So, and in the case of like some of these generational farms, they can say, well, the kid doesn't want to do it. So now I'm going to sell it for the big amount of money. That's to relieve yourself of the guilt of saying, well, I cashed in on that. So that's a lie. Anybody that tells you that these young people don't want to work and don't want to do it is a lie. And you would think that the number of farmers in this country, as we've doubled our population, I forget how many years ago we doubled our population, what the spread is, but you would think as the population's increased, obviously you need more farmers, and it's done the exact opposite. As we get AI and all this other technology, what are we going to do with all these people? People need a purpose. People that don't have a purpose, idle hands, right? That's the saying. Because your self-worth goes down. If somebody just gives you a check, let's just say You don't have to work another day in your life. Somebody just hands you a check each week. What's your self-esteem going to be? What's your self-worth? It's going to be poor. And when your self-worth goes down, your morals disappear. Pretty soon our whole country devolves. So to me, let's keep people busy. Let's put more people back out on the land. So if you guys got any questions, fire away.
Questions, please. My students know if you don't ask, I will, so.
Okay,
Um,
then we'll get you next. Yeah.
I've been hearing about different land trust programs that are working with farmers to help transition farmland from aging out farmers
Okay.
to new generations of farmers. Is that something you're familiar with? And so how
I have-
helpful do you think that is?
I have heard some of that. I think that's a great idea. There's been some land trusts in our area selling the development rights or buying the development rights away. Believe it or not, it hasn't impacted the farmland values as much as you think. Farmers are still buying that land just simply because the net worth is high enough. I wasn't going to develop it anyways. We aren't going to develop all the land. So yeah, I think it's a good idea. It's going to be work, obviously, to make it happen. I still think as you get greed involved, there was a farm I heard of that the father had died, and before he died, his farm was surrounded by like 4 neighbors, and they all kind of figured out, okay, you're going to end up with this, you'll end up with this, you'll end up with this. After the father died, an auctioneer approached the child and said, I can get you so much more than that. And that's exactly what he did. So greed gets involved, and that's a bad thing. So if the asset values stay that high, it just becomes too expensive, period, where now you've got to entrust this old farmer that's going to sell it for you at even 50% off. You can't just buy it and farm it now, right? So he's got to cut you the deal of a lifetime, right? And he's got to know that you're not going to say, this farming thing really is too much. I'm going to sell now, and then this kid is going to sell. That's not right either. So there's a lot of things to work out with that, I guess. But I think programs like that are great. I think any kind of transition, mentoring programs, et cetera, are fine. I think that's all a great idea.
Thank you for your presentation. I think you have put on the table a lot of things that we have to discuss about agriculture, not only here, but I think everywhere when we talk about agriculture, farmers and communities. My question is, if you are experiencing some climate change factors that are affecting your activity. I mean, we have started, but I don't know how it's here.
So I will say my farming practices have changed over the years, but part of that's technology. So seed got better. So like corn, there were old farmers that were like, we can't, it's a beautiful April day, and they're like, we can't plant though, because it could get cool and it could get wet. So we don't dare do it. So we'll wait. So is the weather different? Just have more faith in the technology of the seed. Like, the seed will be fine. Because, I look back as a kid, we've had stretches of just bitter cold winters for a few years in a row. And then we've had, sunny, warm weather at Christmas time. I've seen that, way back when I was a kid too. So I don't know if we're necessarily seeing that. I think a lot of it, like we wouldn't as a kid. So corn is, you plant corn according to the maturity. So that's how it's rated by the days of maturity. So an 85-day corn was considered really young or early when I was a kid, but nobody planted anything past 95 day where we were. That just didn't happen. 95 day was the maximum. Today we're up to 102 day or something. But part of that is, like I said, we're planting early. We're doing things that you just wouldn't do. Planter technology got better, the equipment got better. So I don't know. I don't know. Every time I start to think, these winters are getting warmer, and then we have a winter like we've had this year where we've had wicked, wicked cold. So I don't know that I'm ready to say that that's the whole connection there yet or not, that that's really changing thing. But I do think that if we want to change our farming practices for whatever reason, let's just say we need more cotton in this country. I know dang well that we can develop varieties and everything else, to do it. And, and saving agricultural departments and land grant universities is pretty important too, to a lot of that. For that research and development, because then you don't owe some company for that, right? If we develop it through the university system or that. So, yes.
It's kind of reply to that. While I was traveling once, I did end up sitting next to someone who was from Purdue University, and they were funded by Monsanto at that time.
Yeah.
He was from Africa and was going back and forth.
So, this has always been a head scratcher of mine. So, Mexico is one of our greatest customers for exports for corn. I think in corn, they've always been number one. Mexico didn't want GMO corn. The European Union didn't want GMO corn. So everybody's screaming, we don't want your GMO corn. You think our government, it would have been the perfect opportunity to go, okay, maybe we should rethink this GMO thing. Let's bring back, this non-GMO market and everything else. That did not happen. Instead, our government threatened and huffed and puffed and said, follow the science, you're going to buy our product. And to me, that was a misstep. Whether GMOs were, I'm not saying good, bad, or indifferent about them, but I'm just saying from a purely business standpoint, it seemed foolish to me that you had an opportunity to probably sell more. Now you're taking this customer and going, you're going to take it, you're going to like it. They're not going to buy any more than they have to, right? So to me, that seemed like a really foolish maneuver, and I don't know that why our government would, back that policy, but they did. I don't know if there's a connection there, but yeah, I think we need to get some of that independent, we need to get some businesses out of this independent research. That's, to me, seems like a conflict of interest. Yes.
Curious what you see as the potential for political organizing among small and mid-scale farmers in your area or wider than that. I mean, farmers were the backbone of the populist movement in the 20th century. So I'm curious what the potential is like today, because I think a lot of small mid-scale farmers agree with you about a lot of these things.
I think it's maybe getting there, but traditionally you become a farmer because you're independent and, you're not a people person. So it's really hard. The NFO tried for years. I can remember when I was 22 years old, their milk prices were really low, and that was I first started on my own. And I dumped my milk. They were trying to organize a milk dump, and I did that. And I asked some neighbors. I said, "Here's this petition. I'm going to sign my milk," and they laughed at me. And they didn't laugh at me because I was an idiot for this is a terrible cause. You're an idiot. But they laughed because they're like, it's not going to make a difference because you dump, this guy is just going to get a better price. And they knew that. So, but I do think if there is a chance to change things, now would be the time. I'm shocked after COVID what it did to part of the reason the beef demand is as high as it is because people found out after COVID, they're like, well, instead of going to McDonald's, I could actually have a steak. I just didn't know how to cook a steak before. So they learned to cook, and people found out, they're like, oh, I kind of like to do that sort of stuff. And then when when food becomes something that's a hobby also, then you take an interest in it and you're like, well, where is this steak coming from? And then they're like, well, this guy, I know that this guy makes my steak versus, I asked earlier today, if you had a choice between a steak that the farmer came from the US, he's turns his cattle, there's certain protocols to follow, turning cattle out on pasture, et cetera, is followed, whatever. Or this steak that came from South America. It could be from Argentina, it could be from Brazil, but we don't really know. But it's here in our country. And that's a lot of the reasons why they've been fighting country of origin labeling and stuff. They're like, which country of origin labeling to me seemed like a no-brainer. Like, why would we not as consumers want to support our own country? That doesn't make you a bad person it's not my way of saying I can't stand you, Brazil. I wouldn't buy your beef. It's no, I want to support our country.
It's not a choice.
Right. So there's that. Yeah, I think things are happening. I worry it's too late. And that's brings up the like Farm Bureau. The government used to Congress feared Farm Bureau. You did not want the scorn of Farm Bureau, right? Or the Farmers Union. Well, yeah, your rural voting population, at one point were a significant amount of them were farmers, but not just them. If at one point, like to live in our town, if you weren't a farmer yourself, your grandfather was, your uncle was, somebody was. So the thought of if you piss off the farmers, boy, you're going to lose the entire rural vote. So they're like, don't make Farm Bureau mad. Well, now farming has come this much of the population. Like when I asked earlier today, how many of the group was farmers or came from a farm, it was a small amount. And then there was a few more, and I said, was your grandfather? And I said, well, if we kept going, and I kept going generation after generation, eventually you're probably all going to have your hands up if you knew the data for sure. But there's less and less of us. So our strength is in numbers. So I kind of feel as we continue on this path of very, very wealthy farmers that own a lot, and then very poor people down here, the support for farmers is not going to be there. And the guy in the middle, once again, is collateral damage again, because he's not this guy up here, but these people don't like that guy up there. So I worry a lot about that. So timing, I think, to me is of the essence of this period.
Question about what is your opinion or your thoughts on the AI processing centers and they're saying that they're going to bring back rural America and they're going to give more money. What are your thoughts on their claims?
Oh, absolutely. I don't believe that. Like, so AI is going to hire a bunch of people to run them? No.
They're gonna suck down a lot of energy.
Yeah, what you're gonna do is overload the power grid, take away, how many people's wells might go dry. They talk about the water usage, et cetera. And yes, there'll be some construction jobs, right, when they build them, but construction jobs don't tend to be consistent. Like once it's built, so to man the AI data centers, I don't know what you get from that. That worries me. So yeah, I'm flat out against AI because fundamentally I'm against AI because there was one thing that differentiates human being from every other animal is our ability to think, right? So we could train monkeys to do some jobs, right, that human beings could do, but thinking was the one thing and reasoning is what we did as human beings. Why would we engineer that thing? Are we that lazy of a species that now we're like, I can't even think for myself anymore,
I use that to design the flyer, thank you. Okay, last question, Annie.
I would just say, I've been doing research on political economy of American agriculture for 15 years, and that was the most coherent analysis I have seen like ever. So that was amazing, and thank you, and it's a privilege to be here. It was awesome. I like your thoughts about crop insurance. I was like, man, yeah, moral hazard on crop insurance, like guaranteeing the ROI to the insurance companies just to start. But super interesting when you're like, we should just limit crop insurance to things that are not cash rent acreage. And I was wondering if you could just get a little bit nerdier for me on the crop insurance program. Everybody else can go to sleep if you want. But it's like, we got like in Indiana, it's what, like 67% rented acres in Indiana? You know, so it's like, what, how would you see transitioning away from the current moral hazard in the crop insurance program to something that actually redirects resources to folks who are going to be in their rural communities?
So there's so many things wrong with crop insurance. I could talk an
Yeah,
hour on crop
amen.
insurance. But I will say this. So let's just say you go buy a new Tahoe, right?
Yeah.
And she goes and buys a new, let's just say, turbo Porsche. You both shouldn't pay the same insurance premium, right? But you do in crop insurance. And how that relates to land is there's certain acres that are very risky to farm, whether it be soil type, precipitation patterns, etc. But if you can tie that into an operation, now I'm not talking about like going out to the high plains or something where, overall it might be harder to insure that. But there's areas just right in here in Indiana that, boy, that really shouldn't maybe be farmed, but we can tie it into our enterprise. And so, because you're APH, especially with optional units. So optional units means, enterprise units means I farm 1,000 acres here. I'm insured X amount on every acre for this 1,000 acres I farm. Optional units are, I farm 200 acres here, 100 acres here, 300 acres here, et cetera, till you get that 1,000. It's all in different places. So as long as they're in a different section, they have their own APH. So what happens with that then is that you end up being able to manipulate the APH on this poorer piece of ground because you start renting this risky piece of ground and, crop failure, poor crop, you get paid. But your guarantee drops because then you start to average in the poorer years. After about 4 or 5 years, you start going, it's no longer profitable to run this ground. So now my son's going to run this ground and he's going to get a few more years out of it. And it didn't help anybody in this country one bit. It didn't produce good crops through any of that time frame, et cetera. But somebody made money on that the whole time. So if this was the Porsche and the Tahoe, it'd be like, well, no, your overall insurance rate on that piece of ground, like if you started to tie the APH to the ground, including if it went across operators or something like that, then eventually some of those poorer pieces of ground would go away. And I say, to give the young and beginning farmers a little bit of a break, is they're exempt from that. So then they can take this riskier piece of ground to get a start, where the older established farmer doesn't need that. And if nobody runs it, it'll go back to being cattle pasture like it probably was before we started to expand our acres in this country. So yeah, the premium's not tied to, once again, just like the land values, we've disconnected from its productive value to me. So right or wrong, I don't know. There's a lot of friction with some farmers when you start talking, we need to change this. So, but we started to grow more expensive crops like corn. Corn was not a cheap crop to grow. We started to grow more expensive crops in these fringe areas because we could start to guarantee them. So if you take that out of it, then, I don't think, because everybody says, well, yeah, but we can't grow anything else now profitable. Well, what happens is you inflated the expenses, right? The land rent costs, the inputs, everything went up. So if you start to take that market away or that guarantee on it, eventually those acres will go down and then everything will adjust. Like I said, it's going to hurt agriculture and America for a little while, but this isn't super sustainable. This continues on, then, we've seen the pattern and it's accelerating. There just won't be anybody left.